A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
We're going to be talking about Alpha Australia and some new ways that you might think about reaching out to young people today. One of the biggest challenges that Christian leaders grapple with is how to pass on the baton, how to pass on the flame of passion for the gospel to the newest generations. When we talk about young people today, often we're talking about Generation Z or Generation Alpha. Which ones are those? Gen Z, basically people under 30. Gen Alpha, those who are under 12. Well, the good news is there appears to be a spiritual awakening in younger generations and being identified around the world, but also here in Australia. And why would that be? Well, some are saying the fall of the new atheism movement and the migration of public intellectuals towards Christianity. It's suddenly made Christianity seem like an intelligent option. Well, there are unique characteristics that mark young generations, and adapting to the needs of young people means attention to the way the gospel and disciple-making methods are delivered. Well, Skip Smith leads the church engagement and prayer with Alpha Australia. Skip, I want to say a special welcome along to 2020.
Thanks, Neil. It's great to be here with you today.
Hey, Skip, now you have just recently released an updated Alpha Youth series, and it's a response to some new research that's been coming out. A new series, this is for a new way of adapting to this younger generation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same message, but a different method. And what we've looked at is we did some research, not just here in Australia, but internationally, looking at responses to Gen Z, as you mentioned before, and Gen Alpha, but particularly Gen Z, about how they view Christianity, how they view faith, how they view the gospel, and how they interact. So questions that they're asking not so much anymore. So their parents were asking questions like, how do I know God is real? And those sorts of questions. And so the apologetics era, they're not asking those questions so much, we found out. We found out things like they were asking, is God good? And how does God affect my life? So these are the sorts of questions they're asking rather than does a God actually exist or not?
Some of those sound like feelings questions too. We often think about younger generations and, feelings are everything. And, sometimes we are amused by that. Sometimes we're disturbed by it. But there is a certain sense in which, do you think that younger people have a feelings orientation?
I think they're a lot more centered. I think there's a centeredness and there's been so much of the way that they've been brought up about connecting with feelings. So you look in psychology and that a lot more about mental health awareness, about how to connect with feelings and thoughts and your environment around you and how the interplay of all of those affect the whole environmental movement about how our environment impacts us. So I think, feelings are part of that, but I think it's more than that even. It's a sense of where they fit in the world is a lot different to perhaps the previous generations.
And what we're hearing is that if there's an awakening among young people, it's those concerns that they have, they're looking for those needs to be met. And therefore, you have to adapt some way to be able to communicate.
Absolutely. It's taking them to what their questions, because sometimes we're giving answers to questions that nobody's asking. And so we can be saying a whole bunch of stuff which is all good and right and true. And I'm talking here not just only about gospel, but anything really. But to really connect, as we know, with our audience and with those people, it's like, what are the questions they're actually asking? What are they grappling with? What's their issues? And we understand that the gospel and the word of God has an answer for every one of those. It's just finding what God is saying to meet those needs.
Now, Skip, let's talk Alpha for a few moments. You're the engagement guy, so you should have all the facts right at your fingertips. So just putting you on the spot, the success and the growth of Alpha, and it's not just here in Australia, but I think 175 countries around the world.
That's right.
But this is not something that's like a new kid on the block. This is not an experiment. This is not something that we're just giving this a try. It's tried and true.
Yes.
And for someone who's looking for a way to reach out to young people, this new facility that you've got, this new series, is going to be very, very valuable.
Absolutely. We're so excited by it. We just released this new series this year, and it's already getting so much positive feedback. But before we get to that, Alpha is working, Neil. And that's the thing, we don't take it lightly as well. It's not like, look how awesome we are. Nicky Gumbel says, Alpha's good, but it's not that good. So Nicky Gumbel is the pioneer of Alpha. Yep. So he took it up and really molded and shaped it into what it is today. And in Nicky's words, it's good, but it's not that good. Like it's punching way above its weight. And we really put that down to the grace of God upon that and seeing, and it's God's hand that's going out, because it's a tool that people have found works so well in pretty much any environment. And that's the thing that we found, that the way that the Alpha is set up is that whether for age group, whatever age group you're part of, whatever demographic, social demographic, even where you meet, and whatever denomination you're a part of, Alpha has an ability to bring the central truths of the gospel in a way that people can really engage with.
And that would be because it creates something of a culture, doesn't it? Because you've got people who are opening their homes. There's a hospitality dimension there, and there's food involved. So it's not just watching a talking head.
That's right.
This is really formation of relationships when you're actually part of an Alpha course.
Totally. That's part of the core when I do training, because that's part of my role on my team, is to help people understand the heart of Alpha. Alpha's not just about information. It's not a whole series of really well put together videos that you're just meant to learn more about. That's part of it, but actually that's not the central part. The central part is that Alpha's about life transformation, and that only happens in community. And we've realized very on that the gospel is best understood and learnt and engaged with in community, not just by individuals. And so now, while it can work in that space, it's best done in this space of group and people together sharing their thoughts and feelings and understandings. So yeah, Alpha, we used to say, it's not, if there's no food, it's not Alpha. When we went online, and now we have even online Alphas, we can't say food anymore because, we're not sort of having a meal, but it always starts with a time of connection, Neil. Alpha always starts with a time of connecting together, usually around food if you're in person. And that's a time when, especially if you've got people who aren't part of the faith and not exploring faith, they go, oh, hang on, these people are just normal, regular people. And we go, yes, we are. And we're on this journey together, and they're invited in. Then we have a look at a video or a talk, which goes for about 25 minutes. And that's the presentation of the gospel done in a really great way and a very effective way. And then here's the magic sauce that we say that happens in Alpha. It's what happens after that. We then open up for a time of discussion where it's not more teaching. It's not, this is what you should believe. We create this safe space where any guest can ask any question, challenge everything, and know that they're not going to be judged, that you are safe to go, actually, I think this is all rubbish. And the people in the group aren't going to shut you down. They're going to go, okay, we hear you. We may not agree with you, but tell us why you think that. And in a world where on social media, if you disagree with somebody, it's very confrontational. If you disagree with me, you must hate me. You're a hater because we have different opinions. But in Alpha, we're creating these oases where people can bring their ideas, their struggles, their concerns, even their thoughts that may not agree, and know that they're not going to be judged. They're going to be loved and accepted and welcomed in, and their voice is going to be heard.
And you get people from all sorts of religious backgrounds, don't you? And, so whether you're coming from a Catholic upbringing or an Anglican upbringing or a Pentecostal upbringing or no religious upbringing at all, it always strikes me as being really amusing that Nicky Gumbel comes across as this very straight-laced Anglican minister. And that's what he is, isn't it?
Yes, he is.
But really, one of the beautiful things about Alpha is that there's such an appeal because it's more about biblical Christianity rather than denominational Christianity.
Oh, look, one of the things that Nicky and the leaders of Alpha have been able to do so well over the years is keep the central message of the gospel, the thing that every church denomination agrees on. It's the core of the gospel that we've brought it down. And so sometimes with other denominations, they go, why don't you emphasize this or why don't you talk about that? And we say, we're Alpha, we're not Beta, we're not Gamma, we're not Delta, we're Alpha, we're the first principles, the thing that's the very core of the gospel message. And because of that, and because we've stayed very strictly and concisely and focused in on that, it's meant then that Alpha can be accepted by every denomination. They can add their own flavors and thoughts and ideas and expressions of how that outworks after. but alpha's that part that we all say, this is the core.
And you've got Gen Z, the under 30s. You've got Gen Alpha, the under 12s. You've got to change and upgrade and adapt. And that's what you've got with this new series.
Absolutely. What we've done is we've taken Alpha and the core way that Alpha is built. We've got core things we touch on, things like who is Jesus? Why did Jesus die? What is the Bible all about? And prayer. And how does God guide us? And really important topics. But what we've done is that we've asked the Generation Z what their thoughts are about that, and we've designed it in a way that is led by a whole bunch of hosts that are Gen Z themselves. So when young people are watching it, they're seeing someone like them on the screen hosting the conversation, and we've got 7 hosts on this series. So again, it's that whole idea that we move in packs, these younger people. It's not about one person telling us all the information or being the leader. It's this group of us together going on this journey. And they're from all over the world, boys and girls, I should say men and women. They're, young men and women. And the whole series, it's done in such a wonderful way that it's sharp, it's fast, it's impacting, it's visually a feast is how I would describe it. And people are so responding so well to it, Neil.
Life, culture and current events from a biblical perspective. This is 2020 with Neil Johnson on Vision Christian Radio.
Our talkback line open, 1800 316 316. And we're talking about young people, and you might have your own impression. And if you are a part of either of these generations, you might be a part of Gen Z, you might be under 30. I think it must be between age 13 and 30, but if you're, probably at school if you're under 12, but certainly love to hear from you if you're in Gen Z, and you might have a question about what Alpha does. You might have a question about young people. You might have your own critique and saying, well, nobody really seems to communicate on my wavelength. So 1800 316 316 to join in our conversation. Hey, Skip, let's talk quickly about the sort of things that are different about a youth presentation, about a young people's Gen Z presentation. I know you've got some different dimensions here called life essentials and things like that. What is it that creates these new dimensions that we all need to be aware of?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. What it looks like for younger people often, and we've heard this bemoaned sometimes, I think, about younger people, is attention span. So we have shorter, punchier episodes with more breaks in between. It's also, as we were redesigning the Alpha Youth series, because young people are wanting to run it in schools, school lunch hour is sometimes only between half an hour to 45 minutes. So what's a way that we could shorten it down so they could get there with their lunch, have a conversation about faith with their friends in a lunch hour? So things that are shorter, being led by, again, people who are their age or just above, so that, our hosts on Alpha Youth series were all in their early 20s. So that's the sort of age bracket. It's like the older brother, sister of the demographic that we're reaching out to. They feel younger. They can talk the same language. So the in terms references that are cultural references, that are just dropping those in there as well. We don't want to date it too much, but at the same time, those things resonate. As soon as you drop a cultural reference that people get, I've watched it and going, I got no idea what you were just talking about right then. But all the young people go, what? That was just this, So those are some of the things that we do. And then again, visually, making it look exciting. When you think of gaming culture and the colours and the brightness and the look of what that looks for young people on a screen, and that's normal for them. That's not something that's an different or unusual. That's their native world. So presenting it in a way that looks almost like a video game, that things are happening and there's animations and we're cutting, and then all of a sudden the background changes and then they're here in the middle of the ocean, then they're on the moon, then they're somewhere else. These things are what young people go, oh, I get this because it relates to the world I'm currently inhabiting.
The world young people are inhabiting, because some will say they're exposed to so much information these days. In fact, the hopes of a younger generation, or the dashed hopes of a younger generation, then the aspirations of young people, or the dashed aspirations of young people, because they're under all sorts of fear and, the world's going to end in 2030, didn't you know? But when we have this sort of environment for young people, And when we talk about the spiritual awakening that seems to be happening around the world, do you think there's a link in all of that? That there are pressures that young people are under that maybe the rest of us were not, but this is actually creating an environment for perhaps an awakening?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I don't think we can truly appreciate those of us who are, and I'm a Gen Xer, so for example, social media and the online space and the way that shapes and forms relationships and personal understanding and psyche and self-understanding, those are huge shaping factors. Like in my day, if you made a mistake and we used to pass notes around at school or whatever else, and if you got caught by the teacher, this is my naughty days, of course. They were long, long ago, Neil. But things would happen and that was the end of it. These days, if you use social media to pass a message or whatever, it's there forever. People screenshot it. It can go viral. It can go to places that, I've said to my wife a number of times, I said, I'm so glad I was born when I was born, because the pressures that these young people face, I can't imagine navigating those teenage years, particularly in this environment and with all the stuff being thrown at them. My son, for example, is right in that space. He's a young Gen Z. He's 14. And our son, he has to do all his homework online. So what we have to put around then is strategies for him to be able to engage with his homework and things that he's got to do on his iPad that he needs to be able to do to function, but that's also where he socializes with his friends. But how do we then protect all those people, predators and people trying to come in through that space? How do we create spaces where he can have conversations if that happens and when that happens, and God willing, it won't happen. But we live in reality of the days of this is the sort of space that these young people inhabit. And as parents trying to help them navigate that is a real challenge. And I think the response of Alpha is we're trying to think of how they are going in those spaces and how can we come alongside them, and not just them, also parents and those who are old as youth leaders, to help them navigate this well in a God-honouring way.
So our kids and Gen Zs are not living in a safe space. Everyone wants to have our kids and, even if they're grown up into young adult years, we want them to feel safe, but they're not feeling safe because everything around them is a threat. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about spiritual awakening here, what does awakening mean, do you think, Skip? Because is awakening something that's coming just from a divine perspective, or is there something that just happens when you're under threat, when you're backed into a corner? You feel like there's nowhere to go. The oxygen is leaving the room. An openness to a spiritual reality. Is that how you might describe where young people might be at today? If we talk about young people and spiritual awakening, awakening to a spiritual reality?
Totally. That would be exactly right. People are looking for something transcendent that's outside of their current world, because when they're looking at the world, all they can see is doom and gloom. Like we in my time, we had the space race, and there was always the threat of nuclear war. But again, that was always seemed so far away. Again, with social media, the whole thing about the environment, for example, and the world, they're seeing things happen on the other side of the world in real time, and the fear escalates. They're seeing things happen politically around the world in real time, and those pressures, the ability to differentiate, well, that's overseas, it's not near me, but, somebody being elected a president in another country, suddenly it's like, all these conversations about how that's going to impact us. We're like, it's actually not going to impact you pretty much at all. Your life's going to go on, but the impression through that is that it does impact me. So they're going, there's got to be something else, because all I see in front of me is fear. And so I would agree that, yes, they're looking for something extra normal, extraordinary, outside of their world that they can reach for, to go, I need a frame of reference that's going to help me here, because everything I'm looking at is telling me we're tipping this way and that.
And that frame of reference that they're looking for, they're being confronted with lots of different frames of references, aren't they? Because this is what a secular society does. This is what happens when you've got that increase of knowledge and technology, and you think that the answers are going to be found there. But as a minister of the gospel, and you've led some big churches and you've ministered to a lot of people, people are looking for something that is immovable.
Yes.
They're looking for something that will still be there at the end of my life as it is at the beginning of my life. How do you describe what young people might be searching for, but perhaps they are not finding it yet.
Yeah, they're looking for that. Again, I'd agree, that sense of permanence, that sense of connection. We're seeing a lot of young people. In the past, we used to think that the gospel's got to be almost trendy and hip, and it's like it's there. But you're finding also these days a lot of Gen Z are reaching to practices that connect them with the past. So churches that have a sense of ritual, not that's dead ritual, but a ritual that reminds them of and embodies what they believe in physical form is a real interest to young people. We're seeing across the world people flocking to churches that are still spiritually alive, but haven't thrown out ritual and said we're all starting from the ground up and anything goes. It's more people who want a sense of, I can trust this because if it's been around this long and it's weathered all of this, maybe there's something there after all, but they still want the life associated with that as well.
You know, when I said a little earlier, the movement of some of these well-known public intellectuals to Christianity, and I remember having a conversation just a little while back, that they weren't moving necessarily to Pentecostal churches, they weren't moving to even evangelical churches, they were moving to the churches that had the cathedrals that had been there for hundreds of years. There's something immovable about the foundation of Christian faith. Now, let's bring into the context there a biblical faith, because that's going to characterise all of our different denominations. But this immovability, this is what's affecting the public intellectuals. Why wouldn't that affect young people too?
Absolutely. They're looking for something to lay hold of and something, and everyone's looking for that guide who's going to take them through, that person who's going to lead them forward. And so I think the young people are looking for those voices that they feel are trustworthy, that and can show how what they're saying is lived out and makes sense in their lives. It's not just another I thought or another idea, but it's like, show me how this is lived out in your world. So my son loves to watch videos of people playing other video games. So I'm like, what? That's how he spends most of his time. He watches other people play, but because and then he'll go and do it himself. But it's like, this is real because they're engaging in something that I can see. Now I can take that rather than just trust what they see. Again, influences. It's like they're people who are living out, this is in my home, this is me getting ready, this is me using the product. Those are the things that are selling rather than a slick marketing campaign, because they want this connection with authenticity.
Skip, as we talk about this new alpha, and some people will be very excited about this because they've seen just how powerful the old alpha is. The new alpha and engaging with a new generation, when we talk about young people, are you seeing, or is there any evidence that even though it's only been just released this year, that young people are really noticing that there is a difference?
Absolutely. We've been actually quite amazed at Alpha. For the first time in the history of Alpha, the Alpha Youth Series, and again, for my team, we find it hard to say this, is actually there are more Alpha Youth Series being run in Australia right now than the Alpha Film Series. So for the first time, it's really taken off. So young people around Australia, this has resonated with. Youth leaders and young people have really got a hold of this, and we're seeing it being picked up at an incredible rate, more than any other resource we've ever released. And currently it is leading the way around Australia, which just shows to us, to be honest, we were surprised. We were like, we thought it would be good, but we have been blown away at how well received this new series has been.
So when we're talking about an awakening in younger generations, that actually is significant evidence for it, because it's not just whether that young person will come to an Alpha course, but it's whether there are young people in churches who are ready to do something really proactive and really get that gospel out there and help young people understand their faith. Okay, let's introduce Danielle Bedville. Danielle is Generation Z. She's one of the hosts of the new series, and of course the Alpha Youth Series is what it's called, and she's also a host of Life Essentials. Danielle, a special welcome along to you.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here.
Okay, what was your first impression when you saw this for the first time? Well, actually, you didn't just see it for the first time. You were actually a part of the filming of it. Yes. So you were actually asked to be a part of it. Was there a script that they gave you and said, this is what you're supposed to say? You know, someone who's 60 says, okay, you're 25, I want you to say this. Is that what they did?
Yeah, so we had a script, but it's not that we threw the script out, but I think based on all the research and listening to young people, there was more of a draw to organic conversation. So what we would do with all the hosts is that they would film us just having banter and just chatting and laughing, and then they would basically watch that, and they would watch it and observe what we're doing, and they would point out a specific part and they'd say, we like that. Let's try and write that into the script. So the script was, I know it sounds weird, but it's like the script was scripted to be organic, if that makes sense.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it was pretty fluid all the way through.
Absolutely.
And as an Aussie, you did a lot of the filming for this in Melbourne.
Yes, yeah. We got the privilege to film it in the Dockland Studios, which has filmed some amazing movies, and also partnered with the Nant Studios. So we were filming in what we called the Volume, which was, there's someone out there that would know how many LED panels were there, but it was basically just a whole room of LED screens, and that would digitally transport us to different places around the world. One day we'd be in the Sea of Galilee, and then next episode we're back into the rec room, and then we're going to the moon, and then we'd go to like a time machine. So there's something amazing just being a part of that digital, I guess, that digital studio that felt so real. It was awesome.
And so the modern technology allows the special effects in such a way that it really puts you in the scene, and it creates something that's going to be so attractive for a young person.
Yeah, I think one of the things that our director, Steve Chow, spoke about was with young people being so environmentally aware, having us travel to different parts of the world, because that was what the Alpha Youth series was originally. It was Jason and Ben, the original hosts, they would travel around the world. Because young people are so environmentally conscious and they're aware of the gas emissions that come out of airplanes, they wanted to make us stay in one place, but then digitally transport us. Yeah.
Danielle, you heard lots of the conversation that we had before the news. The boss, who's in the studio with us here today, he was delivering some fabulous insights about young people. But as you were listening to him talking about those things, was that resonating with you? You're 25 years old. You are Gen Z. Is there something so special about this new Alpha presentation that just takes it out of the realm of, the former generation and really resonates with you? How did you feel as Skip was sharing those things?
Yeah. When Skip was sharing all those amazing insights, I was just thinking of a story of a young person who didn't come from a Christian household, and when he got saved, he wanted a tool to, bring into his school, and his school weren't keen on him doing a Bible study, so then he decided to run a Life Essentials lunchtime group. And in that Life Essentials group, he had a few guys come in, and then what he would do with those two guys that would come in, he would take them to his local youth group, and then from that local youth group, those boys, they would give their life to Jesus, and they'd go back to their school, and then they'd invite more of their friends to join the Life Essentials lunchtime group. And now those boys who were running the Life Essentials groups, they were student leaders. And now what I'm finding with the Alpha Youth series is that we're developing church leaders. And now that boy who ran that Life Essentials group, he's starting a uni ministry. He's on staff at church. And it's just amazing to see that Alpha Youth, we're not just developing student leaders, but we're also developing church leaders, which I think is awesome.
Let me come back to Skip, because it's getting increasingly hard to be able to share the gospel in a school's context. The secularization that's happening in schools is pushing out even like chaplaincy and religious instruction, education, and those sorts of things. Because that's the case, there's lots more responsibility, isn't there, on local churches to rise to the occasion here, but not rise because there's a rod across their back, but to rise because the excitement about what God is doing.
Absolutely. There's always an opportunity when sometimes we can look and think there's a barrier and we go, oh, we can't do that anymore, and we see the negative. But with every one of those, there's an opportunity, and to look for other ways that we can be involved. So if we can't turn up and do things the way we used to, I remember when I was at school, again, I'm a Gen X, we used to read the Bible at school, in a state school. I remember when I was growing up, and have that in the morning. That was part of what we did. But these days, as we know, that's not what happens, and you're not allowed to do those things. But I applaud all of those churches and who are leaning into things like religious instruction in schools around Australia and getting involved. And they can only run if people volunteer. And for us at Alpha, that's why we created Life Essentials, which Danielle was just speaking about. We try to think, how can we give something to the students to run? Because if we're not allowed to come in and present something, but the students are allowed to share with their friends, and often in schools, if they come to the chappie and say, I've got something I want to do, the chaplain can then respond and create space for it. But what if we were to go around the authorities and go straight to the students themselves and equip them to reach their friends with the gospel? And really, that's been our whole approach, and that's working well.
Okay, so student-led awakening, and then there's what, of course, happens in the youth group. Let's stay with the things that are happening around the globe for a few moments, because I picked up a few thoughts. Gen Z across the globe, as I understand it, at Oxford University in the UK. And sometimes we think, university campuses are they're just the worst places. Faith is not really flourishing, but it is flourishing at Oxford University in the UK. And universities around the world, in Western nations, are discovering that there's a new awakening happening.
Absolutely. When we go to Europe, and as part of my role with Alpha, I've had the privilege of going to our Alpha International Conference that we have. So Alpha originally started at a church called Holy Trinity Brompton in Kensington in London. So that's where it came from. So there's at Royal Albert Hall each year, we have the Alpha Leaders Conference. And while we're there, we go and visit some of these other places. There are some and one of those is Oxford, and there's a church that uses Alpha very, very well, and Alpha's a core part of what they do. We've seen them have this amazing, I would say, an awakening or revival. Both of those terms I think are appropriate. Reviving means to bring back to life those who, might have been not as vital in their faith. So we've seen that, and awakening of new people coming alive to faith, especially around young adults. They are literally running out of room in their church. It's a church called St Aldate's, which is right in the heart of Oxford, across the road from a whole bunch of different schools that are there. And the young people are leading this. Not even the pastors, the young people themselves are leading these prayer meetings. They're having all-night prayer meetings, and they're literally running out of room in their church to hold these meetings because so many people are interested. On the street, they're walking up, inviting their friends, and they've got videos. I follow them as well, as we know the vicar there, and he's leading this. But really, it's seeing what God's doing is incredible.
We are so used to hearing that the church is being downtrodden and that people are, in some ways running away from faith. So when we hear of people running towards faith, we have to ask about the authenticity of that. But that's why we have to hear this sort of evidence. There's also some NCLS research from the last National Church Life Survey that shows that there are more young men in church, and first time ever, well, maybe not first time ever, but first time for a very long time, that there's more young men in church than there are young women. That's got to be another evidence too that things are really, there's a change in the air.
Yeah, I think so. And not to be totally, make these blanket statements, but often young women are often more in touch with their emotions and that sense of feeling, and are looking for a sense of community where they can, and they find it easier to meet together than guys do, perhaps in some ways. But I think what this is showing is that this hunger is across the board, and that in society for young men in particular, and that's a whole nother conversation we could go down as to why young men are looking for role models in a world where, while I applaud so much of what's happened in the church around the world of bringing equality for where women have been put down and pushed up. Sometimes when there's been corrections and things have swung the other way, then the young men have found, well, where do I fit in this? And to be able not be able to find their space. So I think what this is showing is that young men are looking for those spaces where they can be affirmed in a good and righteous way that's not, and looking for role models that aren't this toxic masculinity, but are a godly, loving, and yet affirming of their identity and who God's made them to be.
Danielle, let me ask you about the flexibility of this new young people's alpha, because young people are renowned for being addicted to their screens. They're in a virtual environment all the time and not necessarily face-to-face. Does this new program allow that, that flexibility to be able to meet in person, or really, if you're in a virtual space, you can actually just be engaging online?
Yeah, so it's 100%. It's flexible. What we find is that if there is a space for conversations to happen, I know someone who runs an alpha youth group just through their phone, and they played on their phone during lunchtime at like a little library section, and then all of her friends, they all just watch it in their little phone and they discuss over like their lunchtime, or maybe it's their afternoon tea. And so what I find is that if there is that moment of conversation, because that's where it happens, when they engage in the conversation and they start asking the questions that they're too scared to ask, if there's a space for that, I think that's when the transformation happens.
Wow. Hey, there's a little deception I can pick up. This thought that it seems to be that young people are not interested in Christian things, but that's not necessarily the case, because they can discover Christian things in so many more ways. And we, an older generation, and I'm talking about you and I here, Skip, the Gen Xers, that we might somehow rather be thinking in a wrong way about how God moves and how young people respond. Any thoughts here?
Yeah, I think that we can sometimes pigeonhole just from our own experience. I don't think we mean to do it, but it's a bit like, I always think of it like this, with Moses when he's got his rod there and each time it's like, do it this way. He did it the same way over and over again. And then when it came time for a new way to happen, God said, do it a new way. He did it the old way. Instead of just speaking to the rock in the desert, he smacked it with his staff, because that's what happened last time. And I think we can get the saying that we can have this expectation that because, it's worked for us this way, that it's going to continue to work this way. And what requires a humility on our behalf as Gen Xers and anyone older than Gen Z is this humility to go, well, maybe there is a new way that God is moving, and maybe we could learn from them, and maybe we could learn new ways of engaging that really meet the needs of where the young people are at.
Danielle, I'm just reminded of that scripture, seek and you'll find, knock and the door will be open. I mean, this thought that, there'll be young people who are looking for a source of immovable truth, but they're looking in a whole lot of different dimensions. And maybe that search is essential, but they need to be able to find something that's solid and profoundly truthful as what we would describe our Christian faith. But they're going through a big searching process. This is a way in which people can create the opportunity for young people to discover that truth.
Yes.
And if we don't do something, they'll be searching and continuing to search.
Yeah, that's right. I think young people are searching for something that's real. I think we live in a very artificial and digital world where it seems like it is reality, but it's actually not. And so they're looking for something real and immovable. And I think of, my years of being a youth leader and now stepping into leading young adults. I think when we think of reaching to young people, we think, how can I fill this program, right? Like, how can I add more games or add more lights? And what about the production side of things? But I think what I've found is that, we're not throwing out the program, but let's try and find space for them to encounter Jesus in their own way, whether it's through worship or just an extended time of prayer, rather than filling it for them to find something, leaving space for them to find Jesus. I think that's how they find it. It's just for themselves.
Danielle, are you in demand now that you've been the presenter on this, this new Alpha Youth series? People wanting to talk to you more? Do they recognise that, well, there's something that you were sharing in there that I can really relate to? Are you being invited to, come and, speak at various youth functions and events and things like that? Is this happening?
Yeah. I've had, being a part of the Alpha team, it's just an amazing privilege to visit youth pastors and even just catch up over coffee and just chatting about what's happening in your in the hearts of your young people. So I see it as an amazing privilege that I get to do that.
And for listeners who've never heard Skip Smith before, they'll be wanting to be in touch with you, Skip, because are you available to travel, or can you do some online presentations? Can you, tell churches just how this powerful new way can work for them? Are you available?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned before, part of my role is I'm actually the lead of church engagement. So we've got a team of people around Australia. So pretty much in every state of Australia, we've got Alpha team who are local, usually in our capital cities, who are able then to do that. But absolutely, we do online presentations regularly. The youth, when they were launching this, just did a big national tour, launching this around Australia, inviting youth people in. And if you miss that and your youth people miss that, absolutely reach out to Alpha through us online. There's a little chat bot will come up and you can talk to us through that. And our youth team go and do presentations. Danielle goes and does presentations. We've got other team members, especially designated, especially in the youth space, that can go and speak to youth groups, speak to churches. Our team can speak to churches. We can do it online, in person. There's a whole variety of ways, Neil, because we just want to make it as easy as possible for people to receive these wonderful products that we know will really bless them and help them to facilitate their mission of seeing people come into a relationship with Jesus.
And for listeners to our conversation today who are thinking, I need to get a connecting point here, how I can either connect with Danielle or connect with Skip, but also just to see this new series, the Alpha Youth series, and the Life Essentials series that goes along with that. alpha.org.au, is that the best way to connect?
Yeah, absolutely. That's our main website. And if you want to, if you're a little bit techie, I think if you go /youth, that'll take you straight to their page. But you can navigate your way through there. Go onto our page, alpha.org.au, and find your way there, or /youth will get you there really quickly. Yeah.
And just when you thought that Alpha was just one course, the thought that these new opportunities, new dimensions are opening up, this has got to be a refreshing thing for people to actually take advantage of using these resources, because if they're there to be used, and they will be effective.
Absolutely. Alpha is free. Our donors make it possible for us to give you this wonderful free resource that works around the world. We've also got our Alpha film series dubbed in over 80 languages, so that there's probably, if you're reaching a language group in particular, there's probably one that you could reach with that. We've just filmed Alpha in Auslan, so for the first time, and we're going to be releasing that later this year. So if you have deaf friends and Deaf Connect, we've actually got Alpha now in Auslan. We've got Alpha Youth Series, Life Essentials. We've got the Australian edition. We've got all sorts of products, probably one that's going to work for you to assist you in reaching your community with the gospel.
And I imagine that right across all of the Alpha series, you've got some of those questions, and while the new youth series is going to vary a little bit and it's going to have new dimensions and bringing young people into the conversation, those sorts of questions, who is Jesus? Why and how do I pray? And how does God guide us? Those sorts of things they're perennial questions. They come up all the time. Those things get addressed, and masterfully, in these series.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. And we were chatting before, and you were mentioning that you'd been part of an Alpha, so you've got to experience that process. But yeah, these are the thoughts. And as we said before, Alpha is about those elements that are central to the Christian faith that everyone's asking. So that's what we focus on. And after that, you can take it in whatever direction is going to work with you. But Alpha is really about drilling into those core elements of the Christian faith that people want to engage around.
Wonderful stuff. And I want to say thank you to the two of you. Skip Smith, who leads church engagement and prayer with Alpha Australia, and Danielle Bedville, who is right there in the middle of Gen Z, one of the hosts of the new series, Alpha Youth Series. You were going to say something, Danielle?
Oh, I was really going to say, with the Alpha Youth resources or anything like that you may need, alphayouth.io will also have any of our events upcoming. So we have a retreat coming up called Spheres, which is a retreat for student leaders from grade 10 to 12 to be equipped and empowered to share the good news of Jesus. And so if anyone would like more information on that, visit alphayouth.io and then there'll be more information for that retreat there.
Okay, so there's two websites. The main one, alpha.org.au and alphayouth.io. To you, Skip, and to you, Danielle, thank you so much for taking some time to share your insights with us today on 2020.
Thank you, Neil. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.